when missing a call meant missing everything. It's hard to imagine today, but there was a time when a ringing phone created instant panic in a household. If you weren't close enough to pick it up before the ringing stopped, that call was simply gone. No message, no record, no way to know who called. For most of the 20th century, the telephone worked in a brutally simple way. Someone dialed your number, your phone rang, and if nobody answered, the call just disappeared into thin air. The caller could try again later, but there was no guarantee they would. Important information could vanish just because you stepped outside for 5 minutes. People built entire routines around this limitation. If you were expecting an important call, you stayed near the phone. Families would even ask neighbors to keep an ear out in case the phone rang while they were out. Businesses were especially vulnerable. A missed call could mean a lost customer, a canceled meeting, or an opportunity slipping away without anyone even realizing it. The frustration was universal. Phones had become an essential part of daily life by the mid-1900s, but they still had one huge flaw. They could only work if both people were available at exactly the same moment. Inventors and engineers knew this was a problem. The idea seemed simple enough in theory. What if a machine could answer the phone when no one was home and record whatever the caller wanted to say? It sounds obvious now, but turning that idea into a working device was far from easy. Recording technology, telephone systems, and electronics all had to come together in a way that had never been done before. And when someone finally figured out how to make it work, it quietly changed the way the world handled phone calls forever. The invention that let your phone answer for you. The idea of a machine answering the phone might sound modern, but the concept actually goes back surprisingly far. As early as the 1930s, inventors were already experimenting with ways to record incoming calls when nobody was there to answer them. One of the earliest known attempts came from a Swiss inventor named Willy Müller, who created a device called the Televox. It used magnetic wire recording technology, which was the same basic principle used in early audio recorders. The machine could pick up a phone call and record a message, but it was bulky, expensive, and far too complicated for everyday households. For decades, the technology remained more of a curiosity than a practical tool. Recording equipment was large, delicate, and not something most people wanted sitting next to their home telephone. On top of that, telephone companies were extremely strict about what devices could be connected to their networks. In many places, attaching third-party equipment to a phone line was actually discouraged or even restricted. Still, the idea refused to disappear. Engineers kept refining recording systems, and by the 1950s and 60s, tape technology was improving rapidly. Reel-to-reel machines were becoming smaller and more reliable, and that opened the door for something new. Eventually, manufacturers began experimenting with devices that combined a telephone line connection with a small cassette recorder. The machine would answer the phone automatically after a certain number of rings, play a greeting, and then record the caller's voice. It was a clever solution to an old problem. But even though the technology finally worked, answering machines still had one major obstacle standing in the way. For most people, they were simply far too expensive to own. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you're enjoying this content so far, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch these videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. We all thank you for your continued support. How answering machines became a status symbol in the 1980s. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, answering machines were finally becoming practical enough for consumers to buy. Cassette technology had improved, electronics were shrinking, and manufacturers started producing devices that could sit neatly beside a home telephone. But there was one big catch. They were expensive. Early answering machines often cost the equivalent of several $100s today. That meant only certain households could justify buying one. Business owners, professionals, and technology enthusiasts were usually the first to adopt them. For everyone else, they were more of a curiosity than a necessity. Because of that price tag, owning an answering machine quickly became a small status symbol. It suggested that someone was busy, important, or running a business from home. If you called a number and heard a recorded message instead of endless ringing, it felt oddly impressive. The household on the other end seemed organized, modern, and slightly ahead of the times. Companies also began marketing the devices as productivity tools. Advertisements promised that no opportunity would ever be missed again. Customers could leave orders, clients could confirm meetings, and friends could pass along messages even if no one was home. The machines themselves also started becoming more user-friendly. Instead of large reel-to-reel recorders, they used compact cassette tapes that were cheap and easy to replace. Many models even allowed two tapes, one for the outgoing greeting and another for incoming messages. Slowly but surely, answering machines began appearing in more living rooms and offices. And once people experienced the convenience of never missing a message again, the demand started growing fast. The era of beeps, tapes, and carefully recorded messages. Once answering machines started appearing in homes, they quickly developed a personality of their own. These little boxes weren't just practical devices. They became part of everyday life, complete with their own rituals and quirks. Most machines worked with small cassette tapes inside. One tape stored the greeting, while another recorded incoming messages. When someone called, the machine would pick up after a few rings, play the greeting, and then signal the caller with the most famous sound in telephone history: the beep. That tiny tone told the caller it was time to start talking. And for many people, hearing it could be surprisingly intimidating. Callers often froze for a moment before speaking, suddenly aware that their voice was being recorded. Meanwhile, households began putting a lot of thought into the greeting itself. Some people kept it simple and polite. Others turned it into a form of entertainment. Families recorded cheerful messages together. Teenagers experimented with funny greetings, and some people even added music in the background. Recording a message became its own small performance. If someone stumbled over their words, they would rewind the tape and try again. Over time, greetings evolved with holidays, new jobs, vacations, or even inside jokes among friends. Listening to messages also became a daily routine. People would come home, press play, and hear a small timeline of everything they had missed during the day. Friends checking in, relatives sharing updates, or businesses confirming appointments. In a strange way, these machines turned phone calls into little time capsules. But as charming as they were, the technology still had its limits, and people were about to discover them. When answering machines became a household essential, by the late 1980s and especially through the 1990s, answering machines stopped being a luxury and started becoming normal household equipment. Prices dropped, electronics became cheaper to manufacture, and suddenly these devices were affordable for everyday families. Walk into almost any home during that time, and you'd likely see one sitting near the telephone. It usually lived on a small table in the hallway, the kitchen counter, or beside the living room phone. The blinking red light was the universal signal that someone had tried to reach you. For many families, checking the answering machine became part of the daily routine. Someone would walk through the door after work or school, glance at the blinking light, and immediately press the play button to hear what had happened while they were away. Businesses relied on them even more. Small offices used answering machines to capture customer calls after closing hours. Doctors, repair services, and local shops could all stay reachable even when nobody was physically there to answer the phone. Another feature people loved was call screening. Since the machine played messages out loud as they were being recorded, anyone at home could listen in real time. If the caller sounded important, you could quickly pick up the phone and interrupt the recording. If it was someone you didn't want to talk to, you simply stayed quiet and let the machine take the message. It was a simple but powerful trick that gave people a surprising amount of control over their phone calls. For a while, answering machines felt like the perfect solution to a problem phones had always had. But the more people used them, the more certain frustrations started becoming impossible to ignore. The annoyances. Everyone secretly hated. As useful as answering machines were, anyone who used one long enough eventually ran into the same collection of frustrating problems. The biggest one was the tape. Because most machines relied on small cassette tapes, they had a limited amount of recording space. Once the tape filled up, the machine simply stopped taking messages. A caller might hear the greeting, start speaking after the beep, and then suddenly get cut off because there was no space left to record anything. Many people didn't realize their tape was full until it was too late. Another common annoyance was rewinding. Listening to messages wasn't always quick. If you wanted to replay something important, you had to rewind the tape, press play again, and carefully listen from the beginning. Fast-forwarding and rewinding became a strangely normal part of everyday life. Messages could also be accidentally erased. One wrong button press could wipe out everything on the tape, including important calls you meant to save. For businesses or households waiting for important information, that could be incredibly frustrating. Then there were the prank calls and silent messages. Sometimes the machine would record several seconds of nothing but background noise. Other times, a caller might hang up immediately after the beep, leaving behind a mysterious empty recording. Even greetings caused problems. If someone forgot to update their message, callers might hear something completely outdated. A vacation greeting could still be playing months later. Despite all these small headaches, answering machines remained incredibly popular. But just as people were getting used to their quirks, a much bigger change was beginning to reshape the entire telephone system. The moment phones started changing forever. By the mid-1990s, something quietly started shifting in the world of telephones. The change didn't happen overnight, and most people didn't notice it at first. But behind the scenes, phone technology was evolving rapidly. For decades, answering machines had filled a gap that the telephone network couldn't solve on its own. If you missed a call, the only way to capture a message was to have a physical device connected to your phone line. That little machine on the table was doing all the work. But phone companies began experimenting with a different idea. Instead of storing messages on a tape inside your house, what if the messages were stored somewhere else entirely? Telecommunications companies had the infrastructure to do exactly that. Their networks were becoming more advanced, and digital systems were replacing older analog equipment. With these upgrades, it suddenly became possible for phone companies themselves to record and store messages for customers. This new system meant callers could leave a message even if there was no machine in the house. The message would be saved on the phone company's servers, and the person receiving the call could dial in later to listen to it. At first, it sounded a bit strange. People were used to seeing their answering machine sitting beside the phone. The idea that messages could exist somewhere invisible inside the phone network felt unfamiliar. But it also solved many of the problems people had been dealing with for years. There were no tapes to rewind, no buttons that could erase everything, and no worries about running out of recording space. And slowly, this new system started spreading from phone line to phone line. When voicemail quietly replaced the machine on your table. As phone companies rolled out their new message systems, something surprising happened. The answering machine didn't disappear overnight. Instead, it was slowly replaced by something that felt almost invisible. Voicemail. Unlike the familiar device sitting next to the phone, voicemail lived inside the phone network itself. When someone missed a call, the system would answer automatically and invite the caller to leave a message. That message would then be stored digitally by the phone company. To listen to it, you didn't press a button on a machine anymore. You simply dialed a number and entered a code. A computerized voice would guide you through your messages, playing them one by one. At first, many people were skeptical. After years of owning their own answering machine, relying on the phone company to store messages felt strange. Some even worried about losing control over their calls. But voicemail solved several long-standing problems immediately. There were no tapes to replace, and no chance of the recording space suddenly running out. Messages could be stored digitally, which meant they were clearer and easier to manage. Many systems even allowed people to save or delete messages using simple voice commands. Another big advantage was convenience. People could check their voicemail from almost anywhere by dialing their number and entering their passcode. You no longer had to be physically standing next to your home phone to hear what someone had said. Slowly but surely, answering machines started disappearing from kitchen counters and office desks. And just as voicemail was becoming the new normal, another technology was preparing to change everything again. How smartphones made waiting for calls obsolete. Just as voicemail was becoming the new normal, mobile phones began spreading rapidly around the world. At first, they were simple devices meant only for making calls on the go. But even those early mobile phones introduced a huge shift in how people handled communication. For the first time, the phone wasn't tied to a wall in the house. It traveled with you. This alone started reducing the need for answering machines. If someone called while you were out, there was a good chance you still had the phone in your pocket. The idea of missing calls completely started becoming less common. Then mobile networks began integrating voicemail directly into cellular service. If you couldn't answer, the call automatically moved to voicemail without the need for any separate device. Messages could be stored digitally and accessed directly from the phone. But the biggest transformation came when smartphones arrived. Suddenly, calls were no longer the only way people communicated. Text messages, messaging apps, and notifications gave people faster and easier ways to reach each other. Instead of leaving a long recorded message after a beep, someone could simply send a quick text. Call me back. Running late. See you at 7. These short messages replaced many of the situations where answering machines were once essential. People didn't need to leave a voice recording when a simple text could deliver the same information instantly. Over time, the old rhythm of phone calls began to fade. Fewer people felt the need to wait beside a phone, listen for a beep, and leave a recorded message. And with that shift, the answering machine slowly drifted into history. The strange nostalgia for the beep that once ruled our lives. Even though answering machines have almost completely disappeared, the memory of them hasn't faded. In fact, for many people, those little devices have become strangely nostalgic. The sound of the beep alone is enough to bring back memories. It reminds people of a time when communication moved at a slower pace. Calls weren't constant, and messages didn't appear instantly on a screen. Instead, they waited patiently on a tape until someone came home and pressed play. There was something oddly personal about it, too. Every greeting sounded different because it was recorded by real people. Some were formal and polite, others were funny, and some were chaotic family recordings with voices talking over each other in the background. Messages themselves often captured small moments of everyday life. Friends checking in, relatives sharing updates, or someone simply saying they would call back later. Listening to those recordings sometimes felt like opening a tiny time capsule from the day. Today, most of that has been replaced by quick texts and instant notifications. Messages arrive silently, often read and forgotten within seconds. The experience is faster, but it's also less memorable. That's why answering machines still pop up in movies, TV shows, and even music. They represent a very specific era of communication when every missed call had to wait, and every message began with the same familiar signal. A simple beep that told the caller it was finally their turn to speak. For years, answering machines made sure no call was completely lost. But as phones evolved, voicemail, mobile phones, and quick texts slowly replaced them. Today, the machines are gone, but that simple beep still reminds us of a time when every missed call had to wait. If you enjoyed watching, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and drop us a note in the comments letting us know what you want to see us do next.